Hello, everyone. Hi, friends. I know there's many friends in the room today. It's really nice to be here today. Welcome to this panel on bridging the gender divide in AI with the very impressive Zanti Sharf from the Fuller Project and Ardra Manassi from the Center for Innovation in Worker Organization. So before we start, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the importance of the Women in AI Ethics movement that was started by Mia. By giving recognition to women in AI ethics, she has really made a platform for all of us here to be seen and acknowledged. So thank you so much, Mia. Thank you. And I have to say on a personal level that finding myself on the 2023 list has really made a big difference in my career. And I found out accidentally because I saw the list, thought it was so cool, wished I was on the list, did not read all of it. And then someone told me I was on it maybe like 2 weeks later. So thank you. As you mentioned, although we many times hear otherwise, women are doing so much important work in AI. We are here and we're doing much more than we're giving credit for. And so this is a really important moment of recognition. This year, UNDP and UN Women published a joint report that found that 90% of the world population, men and women combined, hold some form of biases against women. So they asked certain questions on a survey, questions like, should women have essentially the same rights as men? Should women make just as good political leaders as men? Or do women deserve to go to university as much as men? Anyways. So I found this really, really important and impactful research. And we can consider that in an environment in which we continue to see a separation between the rights of women and the rights of men, it's not surprising that the technological innovation of the moment, artificial intelligence, has important gender dimensions as well. And so Mia has presented some of them: discrimination when algorithms have a different output for men as for women, stereotyping when algorithms propagate norms that show the inferiority of women as opposed to men, and exclusion when women are not present in the design, the development, the financing, and the use of AI tools. So in this panel, we particularly want to focus on techniques such as women in AI ethics to address exclusion in AI. It will involve training in digital literacy, of course, but it will also really involve recognition, allowing women who are working extremely hard in this field to be appreciated, promoted, and valued. So let me begin by introducing my two speakers. Ardra Manassi is currently the Global Program Manager at the Center for Innovation in Worker Organization at Rutgers University, where she supports and leads the transformative global leadership program with a focus on women workers and leaders from different sectors and geographic regions. From 2019 to 2022, through the Global 16 Days campaign, she led advocacy campaigns around ILO Convention 190, the first international treaty to address violence and harassment in the world of work. Her co-authored papers and chapters on issues related to gender, including on gender bias in AI, have appeared in peer-reviewed books and journals. Dr. Zanti Sharf is CEO and co-founder of the Fuller Project, dedicated to journalism about women to catalyze positive change. She is the founder and board chair emeritus of Advancing Girls' Education in Africa, an advisor to several research and journalism organizations, and a regular contributor to foreign policy. Many thanks to both speakers for joining us. So let me start by asking you both, what do you see as the most important risks and challenges of AI to women's socioeconomic empowerment? And I'll start with you, Ardra.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Mia, and the team for having me here. It's really wonderful to be in this space. To respond to your question, Elena, in terms of challenges, broadly speaking, I think we need to talk about the broad gender divide existing. And I'm talking about basic access and connectivity to internet and mobile phones. And we see a global south versus global north divide in this. And we also see a rural versus urban divide. So even if women have access to and connectivity, access and connectivity, but still in some cases they might not possess the necessary skills to access it. So there is again the question of digital skills. So from that broad perspective to coming to specifically AI, Mia was talking about some of the numbers earlier, and I think the numbers speak for themselves. So globally, only 12% of women are AI researchers, only 6% are software developers, and women are 13 times less likely to file a patent. So again, the numbers are very stark and they speak for themselves. So I think it's very crucial in terms of challenges to look at what is the impact and the ramification of this underrepresentation of women, both in AI and STEM careers, science, I'm just using acronyms, but can expand it at large. So I think we really need to look at that question. And in terms of challenges, I think we need to also look at how AI applications reinforce, mirror, and perpetuate some of the existing gender biases in the society. And I can think of many examples here, and I think Mia also brought up the example of resume screening systems, which kind of disadvantaged female applicants. And because of maybe they use natural language processing, which uses word embeddings, leading to kind of linguistic biases, and which excludes women. Uh, and specifically based on some of my research, we were kind of looking at how home-based virtual assistants, like, I'm talking about Amazon's Alexa, Microsoft's Cortana, Apple Siri. Uh, they all, like, when initially they were developed, they all came with female kind of default voices. Of course, their alternatives were developed later on, but initially they came with female voices. Uh, and we see an increased tendency of feminization or gendering happening here, and it happens in different ways. It can be voice, it can be appearance, or it can be the tasks they perform. So for instance, if you look at these home-based virtual assistants, they kind of, the tasks they perform, right? It's sending reminders, taking notes, and so on. These are traditionally gendered roles again. So we can see how AI applications in a way reinforce gender stereotypes. And in this very curious, stark example again, there was this case when Amazon's Alexa, they had to actually enable a disengagement mode for the virtual assistant because the virtual assistant was verbally harassed within the households. So it's a very curious example of, again, gendering and feminization happening. And again, if you look at the names, for instance, Siri, it's a Nordic bird, which means a beautiful woman who leads you to victory. So
Didn't know that.
so again, these are all these very interesting example if you dig in more. And again, if we talk about robots, we see increased robots, humanoid robots, again coming with human-like appearances. And again, we see a feminization. Most of you might be familiar with Sophia, the robot. And they again tend to, and if you look at the occupational kind of roles they perform, we have like women, female robot receptionist, as opposed to a male robot performing a security-related function. So again, kind of reinforcing some of these stereotypes. And again, I think I mentioned about home-based virtual assistants earlier. Again, Alexa or Siri versus IBM's Watson, which kind of uses a male voice to help instruct physicians during cancer treatment. So again, you can see these stereotypes being kind of reinforced and mirrored. And lastly, I think since we're talking about labor market and it's a socio-economic impact of it, in the past few years, especially we're talking about COVID years, we have seen increased robotization in fields which are feminized. I'm talking about sectors like retail sector, hospitality, education, and so on. So I think it's really important to have this conversation. I think we have a panel coming up on reskilling as well to realize how different sectors, and different women workers are impacted. So I'll just stop there.
I just wanted to jump in on this idea of women women assistants, women, being given that identity. And it makes me think of Janet from The Good Life, right? I mean, it really never occurred to me. What's that? Right, exactly. But I'll never look at that again. The next time I look at Good Life and I look at Janet, I mean, I think it's really messed up that they automatically assume that she's a woman. But I think I make a joke of it just to say, I think the awareness raising aspect of this is so much more powerful than it's given credit for. Because even in just drawing these examples, I mean, how many times have we looked at Siri and Alexa and had them answer our questions, or in my case, have my kids say, "Shut up, Alexa," which they think is hilarious and obviously is just, they see it as harmless, but it's the beginning of, a kind of disrespect that at least we have the opportunity to address it when there isn't an actual human's feelings getting hurt. But how many times do we use these things and not actually think about the many impressions that it is making on us and making on our children, the same way that, people have begun to examine film and think about how the rules in film are impacting our children. It's far from solved, but many more people have begun to understand. And I think this wasn't where I was planning on starting, but just kind of riffing from this point that you made, Arja, because I think it's really useful for us. This is an awareness raising community, even as we're seeking to understand these things ourselves and then be able to speak convincingly to others. One of the things that's really interesting in the movement within film and within that sector of entertainment is that when we were way back in, just going to the movies, we had very few women directors, and the famous test of, is there a woman in this film who's talking to another woman and it's not about a man? And there are so few of those, so many male leads, and there's been advocacy about that. So Gina Davis has an institute that's been really effective with data and all of these things. And so there's been some progress and some women getting, very serious, some really powerful women leaders like Shonda Rhimes, Reese Witherspoon, et cetera. But what I see is that the streaming service is what has really changed things, because you see Netflix, for example, and the proportions are really different. You're seeing really much more diverse offerings. My theory of that is that it's because there's just instant feedback. So like with the movies, they don't know, did a woman come, did a man come? I mean, how many more women would have come? That information is really difficult, and there's a closed group of people making decisions without necessarily being in touch with all pockets of the market. But in the case of streaming, the information is much more free-flowing, and so you see a real opening there. And I hope that the same can be true in terms of understanding what the real impacts of AI are. And I think in some ways there's so far to go, because really the research isn't all there. The research about the consumer isn't there, for example, in just ways that a market would be driven, but also in all of the ways that women can be impacted. So I just really appreciate your research and the details you're able to share, and then focusing on these statistics, but also hope that just by talking amongst ourselves, we're able to notice more things, and by noticing, able to contribute to more solutions. So I co-founded the Fuller Project, which it's a global newsroom. We are dedicated to reporting about women with a focus on actually catalyzing change, like all of you here, right? We talk first, but then we do things. And I founded it out of Turkey in 2014, in a time of great chaos in the region and a lot of conflict in the region. And really what motivated me was learning that only 1 in 4 of the people that you read, hear, or see in global digital news is a woman. So somewhat similar to, let's really get our head around these statistics with regards to AI. For me, that was really, it just made me drop everything that I was doing and realize that addressing that level of bias would be the most important thing I could do. One, because it is so egregious and it hasn't moved very much since then. But 2, also, what an opportunity to have an impact. I mean, when things are so far skewed that, some real committed individuals can actually move the needle in a way that breaks new ground, opens new markets, brings others into the space. So we've contributed to bringing others into that nonprofit news space, which is quite small, and bringing this idea that journalism can really play a role in advancing the other things that people care about, whether it's health and climate, et cetera. I think the same is true for AI, but really getting that information is critical. I think getting that information is really, really critical, knowing how people are impacted. So one article that our reporters did, which someone sent to Mia, and then Mia wrote me to ask me to come on this panel. So thank you. Whoever sent that to Mia, thank you. Maybe they're here. And our reporter who is Kenyan and based in Kenya, Alan Olingo, and Mukhtar Rashid, who's based in Bangladesh, did a report that's about automation, not generative AI, not some of the things that we're talking about as far as like the front line of AI today, but automation. And I think whether we're talking about just bread and butter automation moving to a sewing machine, or whether we're talking about something much more sophisticated, it's always the same principle. The women are doing the jobs at the bottom of the totem pole, the jobs where they're picking things with their hands, they're serving people with their hands, they're helping people with their voice, they're running around doing a lot of different things. So in the US, that means sales, it means administration, it means food. Manufacturing is a little bit of a different case. Same thing internationally, right? So they reported in Bangladesh, where the garment industry is huge. They have, I think it's 40 million people who are employed in garment. It produces 14% of the GDP. And this is a sector which has traditionally been 90% staffed by women. With the advent of automation, that number is now down to 59%. So where are those women going? I mean, they're going further down on the chain, because the jobs that do convert are supervisory jobs, or they are operating, whether it's software or machines, and women are not seen as supervisors, or they may not see themselves as a supervisor. There's a whole lot in that space that contributes to why those jobs get eliminated and these ratios change. And I'll talk more about that when we get to solutions too. Yeah, go ahead. We talked about
exactly.
it. You interrupt us
Let's
away.
talk about solutions. Well, actually, I want to say, I think the point that was made about raising awareness to these issues is just so important, because so much of this is about gender norms and changing those norms. I mean, this issue of stereotyping in AI is about historical norms and the fear that we have that we're going to perpetuate these historical norms into the future, right? And this idea, this exclusion element is about also gender norms. Discrimination is about norms. So there's that element, and then there's some specific entry points in terms of policy. And what I wanted to ask Ardra maybe is, what do you think should we be doing now today, as we're really working very hard on AI policy globally to address some of these issues?
Thanks, Elena. It's a great question. And I think, Sandy, you brought up the really role of, journalist, again, influencing narratives on gender issues. And I've really seen, some of my colleagues have worked on this initiative called Journalism JIG, which is Journalism Initiative on Gender-Based Violence. And they're trying to change the narrative around reporting around GBV. So just wanted to bring out the excellent works done by journalists like you in this field. And to respond to your question, Elena, in terms of, I was talking about bias earlier. So the question is, how do we address this bias? On how do we talk about responsible and ethical AI? I think here we really need to talk about an intersectional approach, where we bring gender and race into this conversation, and also other determinants. For instance, women, they might face intersecting forms of discrimination or overlapping forms, for instance, because of their migration status, disability, race, ethnicity, and so many other factors. So I think any approach to ethical AI should take an intersectional approach. And we need multi-stakeholders in the room. We need tech companies in the room. We need private sector in the room. We need governments in the room. We need UN in the room. And we need women workers themselves, being impacted by many of these policies. And there are many exciting developments happening in this space. And I should mention recently, the UN Secretary General constituted a high-level advisory body on AI. And Eleanor is part of the team, so she can kind of talk more about the work that is being done there. So it's very important to have overarching policy guidelines to address generally different risk posed by AI, including bias. And maybe national, governments can kind of adapt these policy frameworks uh, as per different socioeconomic context. So there is no one size fits all kind of policy existing. So I think we need to like adapt these policies. So that's about global policies, and maybe I can think about other local examples too, based on the time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, now is the time to really talk about this. So I think this panel is really topical. What do you think, Lanti, in terms of some, critical solutions
Yeah.
to some of the problems you highlighted?
Well, I'll come back to the question about regulation as well. So talking about regulation as a potential solution. And I will say this is such a different conversation when we are among people who are concerned about gender and race. I met Mia on a panel during Tech Week. We came up and it was very exciting and people were buzzing and everyone was talking about new products and new design, and it was about programming and all these things, and it was such a high vibe in the room. And then when it came to Mia and me, we were just the downers. Actually there are a lot of problems. We really, regulation is really important, et cetera. So I promise not to be a downer. But I do think that, people have very different views. Is this positive? Is it negative? And a lot of that comes down to, well, how does this impact me and my community? And regulation is the net that we have in the United States, where we do, have some standards around how far companies can go as far as their impact on individuals. So one of the things that we work on at the Fuller Project is we try to take swipes at the biggest issues out there, the ones that people have sort of started to shrug and just take as regular life. And we all know that sole women founders are receiving about 2%, depending on the statistic, of that money that's out there. And why is that happening? We talked about
Why?
Why is that? How is that? How is it
by this
possible? How is it possible? And we've talked about, there's some female founders in here, I'm sure. I mean, I know Mia is one of them, so I'm sure there are many more of you here, or future female founders. And we hear stories. Every female founder I've talked to has talked about getting hit on in pitch meetings, getting dismissed in a more subtle way, but even being sexually assaulted by potential investors. And there's actually a network of women who support one another in this. So that's one reason. The bias we're talking about is a reason. But also, this is an unregulated flow of capital. And this is not true in banking. This is not true in housing. This is not true in employment, for very good reasons. We have the EEOC, we have regulation, and very often it's lawsuits and journalism and advocacy that force companies to change their behavior. So we haven't had any of that. So our team had an eye on Senate Bill 54 in California. Have some of you all heard this? We were talking about a bunch at Tech Week. So California is the first state, as often is, where a bill was put on the table to require anybody with any kind of foot in California, any VC with any investor in California, to report on the race and gender, of the way that they're allocating their assets in terms of who's in leadership. So this went through the House, it went up to Newsom's desk. There was I think it was a 14-day period. He vetoes 70% of bills. So the fate of this bill is most likely silent death. And also, of course, there's strong connections with business, wanting to keep business in the state. We did an article that came out in the middle of that period, just laying it out. I mean, it wasn't even an investigative article. And it kicked up a lot of dust. Female founders were sharing it on LinkedIn. And he did actually sign that bill. And thank you. That was the only article that dove into it. Then after it was signed, another woman journalist did cover it as well. But you would think something like that would actually get quite a lot more attention, because that is critically important. And I think the lobby knew it, because they were casting some arguments against it that were technical in nature, but this is really going to come back. This is really going to come back, because now there's data. And when there's data, there's accountability. And when there is data and accountability, the people impacted get involved. And even beyond regulation, when you have brand implication, you start to see things move.
And so the US just published the executive order on AI on October 30th. Do you see this having an impact on the way EO is implemented, or an impact on other states as well?
The executive order having an impact on regulation in states?
So no, the other way around.
Oh, the other way around. I think, I don't think anyone working on the executive order or anywhere else would say that we are out in front on AI, right? I think that regulation can catch to other states. I think so. Sometimes when there's a lot of movement in a lot of states, it does have an impact at the federal level, but I can't opine on whether or not that's going to happen. But what I will say is product design, all of these issues, when they happen in California, they create products which are then global and impacting everyone in the world. And these regulations do not account. We don't account for that. We don't have regulation that accounts for abuse of women in factories, in garment districts in Lesotho by American companies whose clothes we are all wearing. There's not U.S. regulation for that sort of thing in the way that we can have in the U.S. So that is, here at the UN, and that, U.S. has a heavy, heavy hand in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think the reason why I'm asking is because the UN right now, it has an AI advisory body, of which Microsoft Natasha is part of. And we're publishing a report at the end of December, which will then go to debate and discussion. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see even responses from groups like Women in AI Ethics and orientations on that. And the idea with the report is to set a direction for global governance of AI. And so it's a multi-stakeholder initiative and so on. And so the reason I'm asking is because the US obviously has a leading role, not only in this group, but also generally in AI and tech diplomacy and the impact of US technologies globally. And I think that there's really an opportunity to have this kind of policy leadership as well and influence the way in which other countries are going to design their technologies and design their policies.
Yeah. From your seat, do you think that Europe is more advanced on this kind of regulation?
Well, Europe was the first mover in terms of the Draft AI Act, which was published 2.5 years ago, but it's still a draft. It's been negotiated a lot. I think the EU had a huge impact because it categorized AI applications in terms of risks, and that really helped kind of frame the conversation because AI just broadly it's difficult to frame, it's kind of complex, there's a lot of different kinds of technologies. So just to say, low risk applications are fine, high risk should be regulated, unacceptable risk should be forbidden, and kind of give a simple framework like that, I think was hugely influential. But yeah, I would be happy to hear your perspective too, Audra, about this.
Sure, Elena. Both the examples around regulation kind of made me think of this example from New York City. And earlier this year, New York City kind of passed a law, AI bias law, whereby those who are kind of, employers using hiring mechanisms which employ AI, they are they are kind of requested or they're asked to do annual auditing by a third party, which to eliminate different kinds of biases. So I think this is like a promising practice in terms of good regulations, which can be maybe like kind of replicated elsewhere.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point also is that we don't always look at cities as leaders in this space, but cities are huge deployers of AI technologies, and a huge city like New York is obviously can be a leader, a policy leader in the space. I wanted to take a minute now. Do we have time for questions? Maybe we can take a question from the audience. Yes. I'm a student managing design. Probably tomorrow yesterday, just a couple back. So both of you speak about the kind of socioeconomic disparities that come from automation traditionally displacing women, as you say, kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. Now, I myself, I'm not really like a techno solutionist, but I'm just wondering, some people say that as AI develops to become better and better at these kind of cognitive thinking skills, it opens up the door for more jobs that are focused on kind of the softer skills, empathy and communication, and increases demand of labor for workers in kind of healing. So I was wondering, what do you think to say on that?
I'll go. I didn't catch your name. Perusa, thank you for joining us all the way from there.
Yeah.
There's a few Canadians here.
To respond to your question, Feroza, there was a very interesting report recently from UNESCO, and it's about the impact of AI on the working lives of women. Uh, and the report mainly talks about 3 different kinds of skills which are kind of needed to survive in this kind of AI transition. One is, of course, digital skills, and here we are talking about very basic skills, accessing internet or a spreadsheet. Then we are talking about AI-related skills, where we are talking about specific, say, machine learning, or natural NLP, specific AI-related skills. And thirdly, the report also talks about a human kind of skills, which they say cannot be replaced by AI, and that is like involving creativity, emotional intelligence, and so on. So I think when we think about future of work or transitions, I think we need to think about these 3 different kinds of skills. And related to that question, I also wanted to talk about it during the solutions question, which is, yes, I mean, technology-wise solutions are great, but at the same time, I think it's important to address systemic challenges. For instance, I'm talking about disproportionate impact of faced by women when it comes to burden of paid and unpaid work. It's we can generally encourage women to be in the STEM careers, but how do we make sure that we retain them in that space? And that kind of involves social protection policies to better take care of maybe child support or taking care of the elderly, which are like again traditionally assigned to females, or even like a policy like providing paternity leave, which is not necessarily reinforcing the gender stereotype, right? Because they have equal responsibility when it comes to care responsibilities. So yeah, policies of this kind, I think, should be supported by systemic changes too, if we really want to see. Yeah, I think I guess I'm all over the place, but I guess I answered your question.
Can I jump in to
Of course, and a final word. You
a
can
final word? Okay, well, good, because I'm going to piggyback on you because you brought it back to like let's just think on a basic level about women. Let's have women thinking about women, and then let's use our creativity to solve some of those problems. Because when we solve those problems, everybody benefits. So. Let's take that positivity of Tech Week and let's think about how we can make women's lives better. Let's think about how women are hugely disadvantaged in the legal system, especially in the civil system, especially in cases of having been assaulted or in child custody cases where they're facing not only abuse, but also legal abuse or financial abuse. Let's think about how we could use AI to attack those problems. Let's think about how we could use AI to make it so that we don't have to search all over the place to finally find a facility that will take our kid, and we don't have to have just a whole job to find out what preschools are going to be open when, and we could just say, this will be open, then put me on the list. I mean, right, I'll give me a whole year back. So the issue is who's going to pay for it? Because there's no money in that stuff if we're talking about the most vulnerable people. There are some activists out there, like now, there are people who are funding reproductive solutions, even though there hasn't traditionally been a lot of money there. Why? Because they want to change the world. So where is the money, and who are the people who care enough, who can put that money into actually solving problems? And maybe once we get through some hurdles, it will become profitable because there's a huge market of women out there who spend a lot of money for a lot of people in their caretaking roles, and they'd probably like to spend money on some of these solutions. Yeah.
Well, this was a very interesting and short but sweet panel. So thank you so much to our speakers. I learned a lot. I think I have 2 main takeaways. One is that let's get this agenda into the policy agenda right now, because now is the time. And the second thing is let's build some cool tech and get some VC funding so we can change that number. Thank you again, and I'll hand it back to Mia.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena. Thank you.